On this program, part one of a two-program conversation with two psychologists on the African American experience in today's America. Our guests are Dr. Alfiee Breland-Noble, Principal Director of the ACOMA Project, African American Knowledge Optimized for Mindfully Healthy Adolescence. Also with us is Dr. Ryan DeLapp, licensed clinical psychologist practicing in Chevy Chase, Maryland with Alvord, Baker and Associates. Both psychologists are members of the American Psychological Association. Just the three of us having a cup of coffee, huh? That easy. Dr. Ryan, Dr. Alfiee.
Yes.
Let's start off with a definition of psychology.
When I think of psychology, I think of the study of human behavior. What makes people tick, what makes them behave the way that they do, sort of what drives us to act in the ways that we act.
Okay. Dr. Ryan, do you want to add to that in any way? I kind of think of why people do what they do, huh?
Absolutely. I think it also takes into consideration a lot of different cultural factors, individual factors as well, and looks at the intersectionality of all of those things to try to come together and see if we can understand the likelihood that someone will engage in a behavior at a certain time. And I think all of those things can be very interesting things to study for sure.
Yeah, it has been fascinating, huh, to kind of get into and delve into our psyches. The reason we want to come together is to just examine what it's like to be black in America today. And when we say black, not only African American, we can add into that.
Yes, so when I think of black, I was educated about this a long time ago when I first started in my, toward the end of my training, the beginning of my career. And being where I'm from in Virginia Beach, Virginia, I didn't have a lot of exposure to people who were something other than African American. So when I think of African American, I think of people who are the descendants of persons forcibly transported to the United States from the continent of Africa. But black Americans, because not everybody who's black identifies as African American, can be from the Caribbean, as well as from the continent of Africa who've immigrated of their own volition. And you know, the way I look at it, I also think of our Afro-Latino brothers and sisters who also can be black American.
And I also add into that Arab.
Yes.
And also parts of Asia.
Yes.
So people, how does that phrase of color strike you, Dr. Ryan, when people say person of color?
Well, I think it's taken different meanings over the course of time. And I think it also, I think sometimes depends on, unfortunately, the person who's using the term in terms of how they're referring to you. And I think it's a terminology that has been used quite a bit to, and from a derogatory standpoint, to identify being of color as something that means you're lesser than or you're inferior to. However, as oftentimes happens within the black community, we can repurpose things and take ownership of the different terms. And I think being a person of color, I see that as, for myself, something that's very important to me and something that's a source of pride.
You know, there's a little video at the African American History and Culture Museum, a little video where people are asking the question, and it's all of men, saying when they look into the mirror and they get up in the morning, what do they see? And so is that a fair question to ask of you?
Asking me, when I look in the mirror, what do I see?
Yeah.
I think for me, when I look in the mirror, it has a lot to do with a lot of the accomplishments that I've been able to be fortunate enough to achieve. And I think it's something that from a very early age, just in terms of how my family raised me and where I'm from, the ability to achieve and the ability to represent your community in a positive way, those are all things that, when I look in the mirror and I see myself, the title that I have and the opportunities I have each day, I see that as also being a part of how I see my blackness and being proud. It brings a source of pride. In that way. Yeah.
You mentioned Virginia Beach, right?
Yes.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Winston-Salem, North Carolina.
In North Carolina?
Yes. So a southern boy. I wear my southern title very proudly. Actually, Dr. Alfiee was mentioning the ideas of how we define blackness and the distinctions between that. And I think for me, similar to you, Dr. Alfiee, I was not very well acquainted with this idea of black not meaning something other than African American until I lived in New York City, when I started getting a better sense of kind of how immigration affects that title.
Help me understand that a little further, a little clearer.
So when moving to New York City, people would ask me, where are you from?
Okay.
And I would say, I'm from North Carolina. And I was like, okay, but then they would say, no, but where are you from? And, you know, that meaning, where's your people from? Where did your people come from? Where did you immigrate from? And that was a question I had never been faced with until moving to New York City, and it kind of represented a gap that I had in my kind of lineage that I hadn't really questioned before. And so I find that that's also an interesting part of the Black experience and how it can vary in that regard.
When we're talking about Black and Blackness, what does that mean, Dr. Alfiee?
To me, it's evolved. I'm Generation X, and so I think it meant one thing when I was younger, in my 30s. It meant something very different when I was a teenager. My parents are of the civil rights movement generation. And so there's a lot, you know, that's loaded coming from the civil rights movement. My parents are from the deep South, Mississippi. You don't get much deeper South than Mississippi, and everything that means. And so for me growing up, everything really was, you know, to use an often used phrase, it was very black and white. And so the nuances, the gray areas in terms of what it means to be a Black person or African American, you know, all the different, as Dr. Ryan said, all the different name changes we've been through just in my lifetime. Like, I'm old enough to remember when Jesse Jackson told us we were, I'm not even sure what it was. I think he said we were African American, and it was a change from Afro American.
Yeah, African.
And so this was like around '88. So being alive and experiencing those kinds of things has really framed and shaped my definition of Blackness. And so I too lived in New York. And when I lived in New York, people would do the same to me. They would come up to me. Some people would speak in Spanish, you know, and no, mi español está mal, my Spanish is terrible. And so I didn't really understand, you know, what that was about and why they were speaking to me in that way. And so, nor did I understand what they were saying. And I think I also learned about the diversity of the Black experience. So many people from the continent of Africa or many Black people from the Caribbean would ask me where I'm from, meaning where in our country are you from? And I think a lot of it had, people would tell me because of my complexion. My skin is pretty smooth and it's very dark. And so they would place me. They would assume they knew where I was from. And it always, for me, it just, the older I got, the more pride I felt in that because it connected me to the diaspora. So it helped me see that I was very connected. And I think at the age that I am now, Blackness is, again, like Dr. Ryan said, it really is a source of pride. It feels very unique. I feel uniquely honored to be African American because that is a very specific experience of what it means to be Black, how my people came here, so on and so forth.
Wow. I'll take a little break. We're talking with Dr. Alfiee, Dr. Ryan, both psychologists, both members of the American Psychological Association. And we're talking about some serious stuff here. So sit tight. You can eavesdrop on the conversation. We'll be back in just a short time. This is America. This is America and the world. This is America and the World is brought to you by Japan, history, hospitality, and advanced technology, sharing tomorrow. The Washington Diplomat, a world of news and perspective. The League of Arab States. The Sultanate of Oman. The Rotendaro Family Trust. The Forerunner Foundation, dedicated to forward-thinking public policy. And the Embassy Series, uniting people through musical diplomacy, presenting international artists in diplomatic settings. You see people for therapy, for counseling. You're working with young people. Talk a little bit about what are they bringing into therapy? What are they bringing into counseling? Do I assume correctly that a lot or most of your clients are African American?
Not at the moment, no. I would say it's a much more of a variety in terms of racial and ethnic background. But I would say many youth are bringing in things. So I specialize in the treatment of anxiety and depression, and also look at more broadly the construct of emotion dysregulation. And so many of the kids that I see have some variation of that type of experience.
Let me correct myself and step back. And going back, if we turn the tape back, when I said to you, do I assume that most of your clients are African American? Is there something built into that question by itself?
I think in a way, I mean, I think we're trained to and we're socialized to think that in many different fields. Well, there's this thing I call black geography. So when black people greet each other, you know what I'm talking about.
What do you mean?
Black geography is you,
that?
like if Dr. Ryan and I were to meet for the first time, once he says he's from Winston-Salem, my mind starts going, okay, who do I know in Winston-Salem? Not that all black people know each other, but you're really trying to place people. I think it's just a way of sort of trying to connect. And so when he says he's from Winston-Salem, I said, well, what church do you go to? Right? Assuming that it's probably going to be a black Protestant church.
Right.
Because the vast majority of black people in the United States who go to churches where most people look like them in that church. Not all, but most. And so this idea of place and trying to find connection, I think that's what's built into that question. I don't get offended by that because many patients are looking, they'll get on a website and scroll until they see my brown face and they say, okay, I want to take my kid there. So I don't necessarily take offense to it, but I think it's just sort of how we categorize and place people.
There is a huge sense of family, isn't there?
Yes.
In the African American community. And I think that if my reading instructs me correctly, that because when slavery happened, so many families were broken up. So so it's not unusual for even people who don't know each other, men, brother, it's a sense of connection. Huh?
I think so.
Yeah, I mean, I would even say there's the kind of, I think, understood sense of when you see a fellow African American or person of color out in public and you give them the head nod, or there's like a sense of camaraderie. It's just simply by, being one.
That's just a head nod, huh?
Yeah, a head nod or some sort of just greeting that acknowledges, like, I see you and you see me, and that is very common.
Why are you smiling so?
Because he's right. I can pass 10 people on the street, and in all honesty, if I pass, 3/4 of the people I pass are white, the 2 or 3 I pass who are African American or black or of color, you look at each other. And I think part of it is just as Dr. Ryan said, it's an acknowledgement that there's so many places where we feel invisible, particularly as professionals. I know it's across, in many different spaces, but as professionals, so few of us are African American in some of the spaces where we work, that when I see a brother walking down the street with a suit on, I want him to know that I see him, because I may be the only person in his day who's acknowledging him, and the same goes for me. So brothers will say to me, of many different races, but who are of color, you look nice today. And I don't take it as them flirting or anything other than Jim just saying that they see me.
But is it part of a big family?
I think so.
Yeah?
I do. I think it is. I think it's just as
So there's a
Dr.
kind of a
Ryan said.
specialness there?
I think so. I don't know if he would agree. But
I mean, I think it also, aside from this idea of being seen, I think it's just also this idea of advocacy, right? Or having someone there that maybe shares your experience to some degree.
Wow.
Yes.
And especially when you're operating in spaces where maybe you're one of few, and then there's a sense of, if I have a struggle that's particularly related to my race or my skin color, maybe that's a first place to start to try to get a sense of validation and a sense of outlet or support. And so I think maybe not necessarily in passing, but in a workspace or some other type of community space, that identification kind of helps you to start navigating kind of how you can maybe identify a sense of support.
You go to a function, a
Yes.
professional function,
Yes.
sometimes you're the only African American there?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
Not just the professional functions. In your work, I review grants. There are many times when I walk in the room, I'm the only black person at the table reviewing
Okay,
grants.
how does that make you feel?
Isolated. It makes you feel erased.
Erased.
Marginalized.
Wow,
Why am I the only person at this table? I know that there's a Dr. Ryan. I know that there's a Dr. So-and-so. I know 10 Dr. So-and-sos. Why aren't they at this table as well? And what is the responsibility that I bear for any grants that come up that are, you can identify kind of what people are by their names. So when the grants come from people of color, do I have a unique responsibility to ensure that these things are treated fairly? I don't know that everybody thinks like that when they're at the table. So it's pressure.
I want to go back to people who are coming into therapy and to counseling.
Yes.
What are the burdens? What are the problems they bring to you?
Well, I think the ideas of anxiety, the experiences of different types of emotional difficulties, and how
Related to being an African American, or
Not
just
in
being,
general.
Just in general.
Generally, actually, I've actually had opportunities where, in the space that I work in, to kind of see individuals of a majority culture, so white individuals who are struggling a bit with their ideas or about blackness and about being and how they're kind of understanding the different kind of social justice movements that are about. And many of these individuals are, very well-meaning, and they're just trying to wrap their mind around what's their space in this cultural movement as well.
Young people seem to be more accepting, more open, more accommodating. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's, they are in a space where they're wanting to learn, and I think they see myself as an African American therapist as, if I'm able to cultivate that space and we're able to talk about maybe sometimes that difference in race and get past that, maybe the barrier that might create, it becomes an opportunity to really talk about, kind of how some of these social justice movements and things along those lines are affecting them.
What are the questions that the kids ask you?
Well,
relating to blackness?
Related to blackness? Well, I mean, I think it's, how do they support the, Black Lives Movement? Or am I supposed to be someone who is, believes everything that comes out of the Black Lives Movement? Or can I actually kind of have a personal opinion or concerns of being considered racist? I think a lot of the more recent scandals of individuals being, I think the Me Too movement aspect of individuals coming out with being considered sexist or sexually abusive towards women, I think it's also translated more towards this idea of being found out about being considered racist in some ways as well. And so it's this idea of like, is this belief that I have or is this thought that I have, does it make me racist in some way? And I think exploring that has been a really great opportunity that I've had with some of the families that I've worked with.
When you're thinking of some of the people that you're working with, some of the people you're counseling, what are they bringing to you?
I think one thing that makes me think of listening to Dr. Ryan is we're visibly of different generations. And I think that there's something about me, they don't know how old I am, but they're pretty sure I'm not 30. And so I think there's the patients that I work with, when they're coming to me, we don't often talk about race explicitly. It's more implicit. But what I'm hearing, I would put under the umbrella of racial trauma, racial stressors. And so, I have a range of ages, mostly young people, college age and younger. And what they bring to me is the stress of being isolated in the environments that they're in. How do I deal with this? This is weighing on me. I feel anxious. I feel depressed. Now, what I will say about millennials and Generation Z, they have the language of mental illness, and they have a language to articulate what they're feeling. I think oftentimes, though, they have no idea how to cope with it. So that's what I often tell people when I do public speaking is we need our young people to have better coping skills. They don't have them.
Coping skills?
Yes.
What do you try to teach them?
So I'm big on mindfulness, and I think mindfulness is something, I'm also a very spiritual person, but that's not everybody's thing, is being spiritual. But everybody can do mindfulness because it really is just being quiet and being present. So I will teach young people how to engage in mindful practices. I will also teach them a little bit of history about the value or the I don't want it to be a burden, but I want them to know how proud I am of them, that they are in the places that they're in, that they're good students, that they've made it to college. And no, it's not easy, but what I want them to know is I see your struggle. I have experienced some of your struggle. You are not alone, and trying to normalize the process. So those are two tools that I give them, is normalizing. Another one is naming what their experience is, because nobody's taught them the language of racial trauma and racial stressors. They haven't heard it. And then commending them for acknowledging that there's a problem and that they're seeking help.
What are the little acts of feeling slighted or feeling dissed or feeling ignored, marginalized, that you run into personally and professionally?
Well, I mean, I think it's a very interesting question. I mean, I think a lot of times in this day and age, the ways in which I may run into that, it's often subtle. It's often things where, you maybe think to yourself, like, is this something that's due to my race, or is this something that's due to my age, or is this something that's due to me being a male? And so I think a lot of my identities may come together. And so it may
That's
be...
a lot to sort out.
It is. And that's what I think one of the things that makes it kind of make quite stressful at times is trying to figure out, when you notice that maybe something has happened that's occurred to you differently than maybe you see in your colleagues, whether it's, certain questions you're asked in an intake appointment, families interviewing you or trying to ascertain like where you went to school and all of your training. And, you ask the question, is this what they're doing to everybody, right? And, you don't want to necessarily become too overly sensitive to it because, that could necessarily interfere with the work that you're doing. But you also want to make sure that, if it's stressful, you want to be able to name it and identify it and then try to work through it.
Is it a fair statement to say that, picking up on what you've just offered, that a lot of energy goes into just being African American in America?
We have a term in the black community, we call it the black tax.
The black tax?
The black tax. It is an extra burden that you carry. Sort of like everybody sort of pays into the system in some way. But if you're a person of color, if you're black, it's the black tax. If you're brown, it's the brown tax, Latino or other ethnic groups. If you're a woman, it's the female tax. So it is this extra burden that you carry on top of what everyone carries. That's just as Dr. Ryan said. Did they do that because they're racist? Did they do that because they're sexist as a woman? Did they do that? I don't know why they did that. Are they just having a bad day? And so the fact that you even have to spend energy thinking about it is something that other people don't have to do.
And I would add to that, I think in a therapeutic relationship, one of the things that is your goal is not to make the therapeutic process about yourself and about your own kind of, aspects of, bringing all that into the room. So if I'm wrestling with that, that's something that I may have to, check at the door and save for my own private, personal experience. And I think that's also, it's a two-way street. So if somebody's asking me these questions, right, I also understand, I also feel a pressure that as an African-American man, I'm kind of representing and for, my people, if you will, in that regard. And so you kind of want to, you feel a pressure at times. I think it's a part of the tax. You feel a pressure to make sure that you are, giving people disconfirming evidence of any of the types of stereotypes that they might have.
So you're having to work at counteracting something that's in the air?
I think at least that's something in my experience in the different spaces that I've operated, I felt that as a pressure, absolutely.
So you have to kind of overperform, huh?
I would say, it's a part of the developmental process of being a professional, kind of learning how to manage that.
But is it also just a process of being an African American?
I would say yes, and I think it's par for the course, so you kind of learn how to do it.
I think it varies by age. When I was younger, I think I felt that pressure. The older I got, the less of that pressure I felt. Because I think when you work for other people, I work mostly for myself.
So you don't have to be 3 times better.
I think you have to watch your P's and Q's. I think you have to cross your T's and dot your I's all the time. I think as we age, I speak for myself, what has lessened is the pressure for me to feel that I need to perform to meet somebody else's standard. I have my own standard, right? And I know that my standard is high, otherwise I wouldn't be where I am.
That's because you're a professional,
That's right.
And you're also a psychologist,
right?
That's
exactly right. That's exactly right. And so I think I've spent enough time and the other thing is that, my experience has been in the area of biomedical research, right? So being a federally funded investigator, you know that you have to work as a person of color 2-3 times as hard. So I know my grants are perfect when I submit my grants.
Oh, you do?
I do. They're not going to be typos. I know my methodology is good. And so, but that doesn't mean I'm going to get the grants, right? Because there's bias in the process. And so I think over time what I learned is I only need to be good enough to look myself in the mirror and say, I put 100% effort into this. But I think, honestly, for me, that has come with age. I was not like that when I started.
Ooh. Let me give you a couple of experiences and react. I remember a friend of mine, African-American, would say, you called the taxi. They're not going to stop for me. Or a guy I knew said that he was into a company, had been there for maybe 6 months or something like that, African-American friend, and nobody had asked him out to lunch. For information about This Is America in the World, visit our website, thisisamerica.net, or our YouTube channel, This Is America TV, and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. You can listen to all of our ambassador interviews on our podcast, The Ambassador Series. It's available on our website and iTunes. This Is America and the World is brought to you by Japan, History, Hospitality, and Advanced Technology, sharing tomorrow. The Washington Diplomat, a world of news and perspective. The League of Arab States. The Sultanate of Oman. The Rotendaro Family Trust. The Forerunner Foundation, dedicated to forward-thinking public policy. And the Embassy Series, uniting people through musical diplomacy, presenting international artists in diplomatic settings.